Tom Halverson, fantastic to have you with us again. You have talked many times over the last several months about how COVID-19 is acting as an accelerant in the world, meaning that it's accentuating trends and issues and problems that were there already. We're going to talk about one of those issues today, which is rural broadband access and the digital divide between rural America and urban America.
Great topic. It is a huge opportunity for rural America, but it has some meaningful challenges. So let's get started.
Let's bring up a picture. I'll have you look at it here from a recent New York Times article that shows a school bus in a rural area, and they had mounted a mobile Wi-Fi on the bus so they could drive it around, and the kids could actually come near the bus and do their homework. That shows that this is not just an economic issue, it's becoming a social issue as well.
Well, we've talked a lot in recent years about the urban-rural divide, and that exists in a variety of different manifestations, health outcomes, educational levels, wages, pick your thing, right? Certainly an issue here, right? If you want to keep your children in rural America, attract talent to rural America, and not allow a vast gap in educational achievement to manifest or get worse, as in between people who go to school in rural America versus urban America, this is essential, right? I mean, it is a catastrophe to have all kinds of people be unable to go to school because they haven't got access to broadband internet connectivity. We are delighted and proud to be associated with many companies in rural America who were brought together under the great leadership of our friends at Land O'Lakes, who created a consortium of co-ops and others who've opened mobile hotspots. They're not all mobile, but in their buildings and in their offices and so forth, so the people in rural America who don't have good broadband at home can go to a building owned by Land O'Lakes or another co-op, and their kids can get connected to do their schoolwork and get their assignments and so forth and so on. If you ask any of those organizations or any of the people who are benefiting from that effort, they would tell you, we can't live without it.
Let's bring up a chart. It's a little complicated, but it shows some data from the FCC dimensioning this divide. The official definition of broadband is a 25 megabit per second speed. And if you use that measure, the chart shows that the rural access is about 80% of the population has access. If you use 100, it's a much lower number, closer to 60%. Just talk about the degree of the gap and how it translates into a disadvantage.
Well, it's a big deal in terms of what can you do economically in your business? What can you do for education? How can you do telehealth? All the things that you need to do or want to do in rural America that is easy and ubiquitous to do in urban America because you have broadband everywhere, right, at competitive prices. This is a big problem, right? And I have a house that I live in rural Colorado. I have that slower speed. It's no contest versus the 1 gig speed somebody in an urban downtown area might have.
It's not just about internet connectivity into the house over a landline connection. It's also about wireless. Let's bring up the next chart. There is also a gap in terms of wireless speeds, and that's shown here. Talk about that.
So same thing, right? If your wireless access isn't as good in a rural place as it is in an urban place, you may not be able to do all the things that you need to do. I'll give you an example, right? Modern agricultural production technology is so sophisticated, the amount of data that is collected and utilized and leveraged for the kinds of productivity growth that we've seen in recent years through precision ag really requires that you have good wireless connectivity. You can't drag a cable all over the field behind your tractor, right? You've got to have wireless connectivity to connect your equipment to the cloud. You can find similar examples in a variety of other manifestations of your personal life and your professional life, including things like medicine, where these days in an environment of COVID, if you're in a rural place, telemedicine is a huge benefit, right? Because it may be 100 miles to your nearest doctor, and you might have to do that under normal circumstances, but now you can't do it at all. But you certainly can see a doctor or talk to somebody or get some advice But again, you need to be able to do it on your smartphone if you're not, sitting at a physically connected piece of equipment.
We are at CoBank a significant financier of rural telecommunications, so we've got exposure to this industry in our business. Just talk about, for people who are maybe unfamiliar with it, why are the economics of broadband access so tough in rural areas?
It's a pretty simple problem. Been here as long as the country has been here. We have a vast physical space in the United States, and the people are quite concentrated. So we have big chunks of the country where population density is really low, and therefore the economics of bringing the infrastructure to those small numbers of people can't be done in a cost recovery manner. People can't make a profit because in order to make a profit, you'd have to charge so much to those few rural people, they wouldn't be able to afford it. So you've got to find some way of bridging that gap between what it costs to bring that infrastructure ubiquitously across the vast space of the United States, but to be able to charge a reasonable rate so that people who would be willing to invest in it can get some return on their investment. And for large areas of the country, those things can't be brought together without some additional forms of revenue above and beyond what the provider can charge to the ultimate customer.
And that means subsidies of one form or another in many cases, correct?
It certainly has. Historically, that was how we did electrification. That's how we brought landline telephony to rural America. We set up the Universal Service Fund, and people got charged in places where the economics worked great because the population density was high. Everybody paid a little bit of money into a pot that got reallocated then to subsidize the cost of bringing that communications infrastructure to rural America. That's worked really effectively, but the mechanisms that we have in place now are old and they are atrophying because landline penetration is going down, down, down. Wireless is going up, 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 and the need for broadband is accelerating. And so we're having more cost gaps, but less revenue to meet them.
How important is it that we reconfigure this system to be appropriate for a broadband world?
We've got to come up with some new financing mechanisms that will bridge that gap between what it costs to bring it and what you can reasonably charge those consumers to get there faster. And that's going to require some thoughtful public policy to figure out some new financing sources that will be sustainable to realize the investments that are going to have to be made, for future decades. And you have to think about it in very long periods like that, because the mechanisms that we've had in place to bring landline telephony are decades old, right? And whatever it is that we're going to build now to supplement the existing sources are going to have to be thought of as not, one-time or surge financing opportunities. They have to be sustainable, recurring sources of revenue that will sustain those investments for the long term.
You mentioned earlier, last question, that you talk to a lot of people in rural America and most, if not all of them, agree this is a big problem. Does that give you some optimism around creating the consensus needed to create these solutions in the policy realm?
Well, it does. I'm optimistic that you don't have to make the sale that it's important. Where I start getting a little more realistic than optimistic is in the desire and the expectation for our political leaders, who seem to be quite polarized over relatively simple things as well as relatively complicated things, to see a way for them to come together to create funding mechanisms, sustainable policy frameworks to realize what needs to be put in place to meet this need.
Tom, thank you so much.
Great to be with you, Arthur. Great subject.